Hey folks, and welcome to Farthing Downs. Farthing Downs is near Coulsdon, just on the outskirts of London, sort of on the Greater London Surrey border. I'm here on a rather warm, it's about 27-28 degrees day today in late August. But there's a slight difference to this film, that being that most of it was filmed in April when I had the benefit of a ranger here, who I'll introduce to you shortly. And we spent a lovely 2 or 3 hours wandering around the place. He imparted loads of really useful information on me. So what I've done is taken that footage and added in some extra footage from here, because we do reference certain things when we're doing that film, things that are visible more in the summer. And I kind of just wanted to give it a 2-season view. So I hope you like the format. And what we'll do is kind of revisit where we went with Tom, and I'll add in some extra footage so that you can kind of see, well, here's 2 seasons, a kind of spring and a summer view. Obviously the summer of 2022 has been really warm. We had record-breaking temperatures, been very dry here. Had a little bit of rain recently, but I'm not sure that would have done a great deal. So without further ado, we'll get into the film. As I say, chunks of it were filmed in April where we got coats and things on, but you'll see where the joins are. That's intentional. So I'm going to hand over and introduce you to Tom, and we'll get on our way.
My job role here is the information ranger, and I work across the 4 Coulsdon Commons and also the 2 West Wickham Commons over on the other side of Croydon, and part of a team who actively manage the sites here for nature conservation value, and also as a landscape where people can come and enjoy these fantastic open spaces. This here is our flagship site of Farthing Downs, and it's also one of our largest sites, and it's probably one of the best places that you can see both city in one direction and then countryside behind me in the other. And it's a real place where people can come and connect with nature and get out and enjoy the countryside. And it's also one of the first places that you can actually see wild animals and grazing livestock as well. So we've got our grazing cows out here at the moment, so Sussex cattle, who actively conserve and manage the site as conservation grazers, and they keep the grass really low, which helps wildflowers and rare invertebrates thrive. So in the summertime, these meadows are absolutely teeming with buzzing insects, colourful wildflowers, and other lovely wildlife as well. So it's a real fantastic site, and definitely the jewel in the crown in sort of the Coulsdon Commons. Yellow flowers here are a really lovely plant called Cowslips, and they sort of come out around Easter time. They've got many nicknames in the botanical world, and one of them is a set of keys, because they're meant to look like a sort of a bunch of keys on a chain. Absolutely fantastic little flower. They're in the primrose family.
Beautiful, aren't they?
Yeah, and this bit here is one of the best bits. They thrive in this kind of short grass, which is where the cows have obviously been grazing.
So we're off the highest point. We're just sort of coming down, like you say, towards the valley here. But this is their, you know, this is where they're at their best.
Yes,
yeah,
yeah, definitely. We're looking at a landscape here that has been grazed by animals for thousands of years, and actually it was quite a productive landscape back in the day, and Farthing Downs is one of the best examples in Greater London of an Iron Age field system. And what that is you've got a variety of different field sizes which have been actively modified by humans, so they hold in the soil so they can be, you know, ploughed and grown for crops. So you can almost see here where the grass is shorter, this kind of earthen mound, and that's what we call a striplet chip. And here is where the mound is sort of piled up at the end.
So that's these mounds.
Yeah,
just here.
Yeah, you can see them
in this line. Yeah.
We get a lot of people who have really good memories of Farthing Downs.
Yeah.
It looked quite different as well. Sort of, you know, not even sort of 50 years ago. Because because it was at one point almost like a Victorian pleasure ground.
Yes.
And even though there wasn't an official road going through it, a lot of the people used to come up on day trips to visit what was the tea rooms at the top of Farthing Downs by the car park.
And I saw references to that when I was doing a bit of research.
Yeah.
So they're long gone now, aren't they? Or
They are,
within a
unfortunately.
number of years.
Yeah. But it almost was a day out for a lot of people.
Yes.
And they used to come up on these big sort of open air trucks, which would ferry sort of 30 to 50 people up, these sort of open wagons. And they would drive up the unofficial Ditches Lane to the top of Farthing Downs, and at the top they would find the tea rooms, which used to host up to 1,000 people, I've been told.
Wow.
And so they would come for their sort of teas and refreshments. And they'd also find swing boats and a few sort of fairground sort of rides at the top there, which have they've been lost over the years as the area's sort of been developed into more of a nature reserve. So we've got the two fields here, which were a later addition to Farthing Downs. So Farthing Downs was bought by the City of London way back in 1883. And it was one of the first examples of a local authority or an organisation actually purchasing land to protect it. And originally the City of London Corporation actually bought land across London and Greater London for preserving them, for people to come out of the city and to find fresh air, and for them to go and enjoy a day out and experience nature. So that was quite forward thinking for, you know, what was, you know, in the 1800s. Farthing Downs was originally manorial wasteland, and it was owned by the Byron family, who were the sort of local landowners in the area, and their manorial estate was in Coulsdon, and it's now the Coulsdon Golf Course Hotel was their sort of family house. Okay. And so they owned patches of land, so patches of Coulsdon Common, Farthing Downs. They were sort of given to people to graze their cattle, and for things like going and, you know, collecting firewood at the time. So a lot of that has since declined, and in the early 1800s there was this big movement for landowners to start fencing off portions of land, and there's a real risk that these amazing open spaces would be lost to development. So we started seeing the move of people from London, from the sort of crowded city, out into the countryside where the air was cleaner, and there was all this land available, and all these villas started to appear and parcels of land were being sold off. So following the sort of general outcry from local residents who were really concerned about losing places like Coulsdon Common and Farthing Downs, there was a drive to ask the City of London Corporation, who at the time were one of the only sort of bodies that actually had the funds to purchase land. And what that brought about was, in 1883, creating an Act of Parliament, their own act, which is the Open Spaces Act, and safeguarding these sites that would be managed for people in perpetuity. So they're protected for people forever. And that was really sort of the first of its time. So this was before the establishment of the National Trust, before the first ever national park was created, or the wildlife trusts. So at the time it was relatively unheard of. But the result is what we see today, is the preservation of, you know, quite large expanses of land in what is a very busy urban environment, you know, on the edge of London. And this is our herd of Sussex cows, Sussex cattle.
So when we were on the phone the other week, is this what you were transporting?
Yes, the loud moves you can hear in the background were actually these guys who were moving from our barn over on Coulsdon Common, where they spend the winter, and it was the first time that they'd been turned out to fresh grass this year.
Okay.
And for the cows, it's, you know, it's a regular thing for them each summer and autumn. But for the calves that were born in January and February and March, this was actually the first time that they had seen grass. And so when you turn them out, we got this amazing scene where they all run and jump. So they're literally galloping for joy, because they're happy to be outside again, and they can see grass, and they know they're going to get good food for the next couple of months. So we've got also in here at the moment, we have our resident bull. I can't quite see, but he's in the middle of there somewhere. So we run our own grazing program and our own breeding program. And the reason why we do that is because we get a really good control over the cows. And as a busy urban nature site, we like to have cows that are calm and good around people and dogs, and you can carry out the job of grazing for the benefit of wildflowers and insects and other animals. And so we've picked Sussex cows, one because they're a traditional hardy breed, so they've been around for a long old time, but also because they're extremely docile in nature. So a lot of people comment on how calm they are, and often, you know, they're used to having to deal with a lot of people, so it's good for people and for them that they're calm and good around us all.
Excellent. So where there are these beautiful cows, there is also this kind of thing, cow dung, and a fresh one there. But Tom, that's no bad thing, is it?
No, I think it's one of the things that actually is really beneficial for the site. It's actually a rarity in most open spaces, particularly London. And dung is so good because it is home to dung beetles and a variety of other insects, and they are essentially the best decomposers, and they're the thing that actually breaks down a lot of the material, and it's quite a rarity nowadays. And so what you may see occasionally is, you know, a dried out dung patty almost, and it's full of holes, and it's, you know, those holes are made by worms and all sorts of other little critters, and if you turn it over, sometimes you might be lucky enough to see a dung beetle. And at one point we had a couple of wildlife surveys, particularly for dung beetles, and found out that we were the top sites in the country.
Wow.
And that's purely because there's this consistent supply of dung year round, which is obviously feeding the dung beetles, and that's obviously useful for many other animals as well.
Is there any reason why we've just got this sort of patch here? I mean, we've got the whole field there. They're kind of settling down there and relaxing and a little bit of grazing, but is there any real pattern, or is it just where nature...
Mostly random, but I think that so we're in a really nice old hedgerow here, which is full of really mature oaks, yew trees, hawthorn, and hazel, and it's one of the best places for the cows to come and get some shade, and to stay nice and dry as well in sort of bad weather. So often the case on a warm day, you'll find them hunkering down here, keeping away from the flies, keeping cool, and probably find a lot more dung.
Right.
But this spot here is absolutely also, it's a brilliant site for bats, and come down on a nice sort of May evening, and you'll see a load of bats that use this tree line, and they'll be flying up and down it, feasting on all the insects that come and visit them. So particularly you get May bugs coming out, and a lot of the bats will come and feast on them because they're a good source of protein.
And what's their feeding window? Because I see them swooping around in our garden just at dusk.
Yeah.
You know, you see them, and sometimes there might be, you know, quite a lot of activity, but it's still the bit that we can see anyway. It's a quite close window. I mean, how does that work? Do they actually feed throughout the night?
They can feed multiple times during the night. So what you'll often find is they'll arrive in the early sort of evening around dusk, just as it's getting dark, and that's a good time for them to feed because that's when a lot of the insects come out. And then sometimes there's a period where it'll be quiet for a few hours and they'll come out again. Particularly a lot of the males will come out and have a second feed. And then again, you might get a sort of an early morning, sort of just before dawn in the summer, about 4 o'clock in the morning, they'll come out and feed again. So that's what's called the emergence of bats.
Right.
So, you know, they'll come out and they'll feed, and then they'll disappear back into their daytime roosts, to stay away, keep out of the light. It gets really warm up here in the summer because there are no trees. It does get quite hot, and a lot of insects like that.
Yes.
A lot of animals actually really like the heat. So particularly sun-loving creatures, butterflies. Yeah. They need the heat to sort of be able to move. So for them, it's the perfect environment. I was hoping you might see one today, but unfortunately, because it's so cloudy and it's a bit chillier, there's this little bit of breeze, they're not out.
They're not as active.
But they should be by now. And we've had about 6 or 7 species, different species out already. And up in the summer that can get to sort of 20 plus different species. A variety of different ones, so you get quite a lot of the blue butterflies, so
Yes.
small blue and chalk hill blues and common blues, and then also you get the sort of gardener's nemesis, the whites.
Yes.
Munch on your cabbages.
Yeah.
You can find them up here as well.
Nature has a way of managing with whatever's thrown in its direction, doesn't it?
Exactly. And we're quite lucky with Farthing Downs. There's quite a variety of different food sources for different animals. So
Little berries in here, would that be later in the
yeah,
season?
so this is nice sort of scrubby edge where there's a lot of bramble, so you get lots of blackberries down here. See these long mature oaks as well.
Yeah.
So Farthing Downs, actually the majority of it is absent of trees, because we have something which is called chalk grassland.
Mm-hmm.
And that type of habitat is really open, and it's kind of characterized by being quite short, where there's less nutrients available because of the chalk underneath in the soil. And that actually helps a lot of uncommon wildflowers to thrive. So you get a lot of orchids, and also a lot of kind of really rare wildflowers you don't get in other grasslands and in other places. The idea of chalk grassland is kept regularly open and almost devoid of nutrients. So that's the idea behind the fact that we have our grazing cows and sheep on our other sites, because we want to remove that nutrients from the grasses that you get, which tend to dominate. So you keep the grasses down and you encourage those rarer wildflowers to thrive. And chalk grasslands, actually, it's not common. In many places, the UK has actually got the majority of chalk grasslands in the world, and they often talk about it and this kind of really weird idea of it being like Europe's version of a tropical rainforest. And they don't mean that in terms of like the trees, but what they mean in terms of the biodiversity value. So you can take almost like a metre square, and you can look down at the grass, and in that sort of metre square you can have up to about 30 different types of wildflowers.
Wow.
So you don't have to move at all.
Yeah.
But in that time you can see, you know, lots of different flowers underneath at your feet. And that's just a combination of the geology, the site management, because it's been, you know, managed for grazing for thousands of years.
Is this the top point here? Or?
This is, it's
Magnificent tree there.
It's almost the highest point, and it's a collection of trees, of beech trees, and it's known locally as the Folly. And there's been a presence of these beech trees here since the 1700s.
Wow.
So there's the old map, Thomas Bainbridge's map from 1770, around then, and there was marked 7 trees on that map, given the name of the Folly. And the oldest here is in the middle, but you'll see that there's smaller ones on the edges, and then a few newer ones which have been planted here on the left.
And they're obviously protected there.
Yeah, so they're given a tree guard to protect them from the cows. They're starting to mark out their territories. So each male will do this long, complicated song flight. And what is that saying is essentially, this is my territory. They'll be calling out to the females, and they'll hopefully breed soon. And they breed directly on the ground. So they're sort of looking for nice little depressions and hollows in the ground, and they'll have their nest there, and they can nest between any time sort of between March all the way up until mid sort of August and even September.
Really?
And they need to have several broods in order to balance the population, to just maintain it.
Yeah.
So what we're trying to do at the moment is we're trying to engage with dog walkers, and also we're trying a new project, which we'll see in a minute, which is sort of using some temporary fencing to sort of seclude an area, so that we can give them space in order to breed on the ground, and they don't get the disturbance from people or dogs.
So how is that done in terms of the order? Do you see evidence that they have chosen that spot for you to then fence it, or do you fence it and somehow encourage them to use it?
It's quite a new one. So we've been monitoring Skylarks for quite a long time on Farthing Downs. We chose an area where we know they've bred successfully in the past.
Yeah.
And we've also chosen an area where it's wide enough, so it might just encourage them to land there and to breed there. And it's quite a long season, so hopefully over the course of the next couple of months it might be enough to have a couple that have that can breed in there.
I guess, you know, the whole thing here is, as well as adapting, and, you know, we talked about the weather and the dryness, but it's also learning, isn't it? You know, then you learn, almost they learn, and then in the future it can perhaps be extended or whatever.
Exactly, yeah. It's the first year that we've tried this, so it's definitely new for us. But yeah, obviously as sort of a busy urban site where you get lots of dog walkers, the idea is that we can give them space to breed, because it can often be just a dog is inquisitive and go up to a potential nest or a nest, and they might flush a bird out, you know, and what that means is if they're laying on an egg and they're up in the air, other predators take advantage of that situation, and often you'll see carrion crows or jackdaws and sometimes even potentially foxes. They'll go in and take the eggs because there's no one there to protect them. So it's kind of a combination of disturbance and predators, which is really sort of hampering the skylark population.
Yeah.
And as we're sort of on the last sort of breeding sites for them in South London, we're really sort of concerned, and we don't want to see them drop out, because skylarks are the sound of summer. So you come up on a summer's day, the air is just teeming with them.
Sound.
Yeah, and it's one of the most talked about sounds as well. So if you look back at old poems, you know, you'll find skylarks mentioned, you know, larks all the time.
Yes.
Because they're so symbolic.
So the lark ascending, is it?
Lark ascending, yeah. So it's the name of their song, like when they come up and give off their sort of really famous calls. So this is an old puffball. And so it's a type of mushroom, and you can see the sort of the spores there, and they're bright white at the end of the mushroom season in sort of October time, and there's a tiny hole at the top, and when that's sort of compressed, so if you go past and you kick it or you brush against it, it releases thousands of spores that are airborne and then spread. So it's different to sort of traditional mushrooms, the kind of toadstools that you get, because the spores are actually contained in the mushroom itself. But they're pretty cool to try and, you know.
Good to see the story. Hello. Would that be anything?
Yeah. So this is quite interesting. It's a good example. This is actually an anthill, and there are hundreds of thousands of anthills on Farthing Downs, and you get them in old historic grasslands that have been grazed and that haven't been cut for hay.
Just going to try and get as low as possible to try and show. So
we choose another
context.
There you go, at some point.
There's a few dotted around. It's quite a big one. Yeah. So this was an anthill once.
It could still be an anthill.
We'll find out in a minute. They start crawling all over us.
Exactly. Yeah. So this is probably home to the yellow meadow ant, which is a type of ant that we get in chalk grasslands. And what they do is they produce these earthen mounds, and they push all the earth up. So you get a release of the kind of fine soil on top, the chalky soil.
And that's the equivalent that I also get in my lawn at home then? Is
That
that the same concept where they...
Same concept, yeah. Might be a different species, but exactly the same concept.
Yeah, it's the way they operate, yeah.
And they're quite impressive. They can go up to about even ½ a metre above the ground. But what you see above the ground is you know, only a small part of it. They actually go underground. You know, again, sort of similar distance. I think even up to a metre below the ground for yellow meadow ants. And there can be hundreds of thousands of them within each anthill. And they're not only just good for the ants, they're good for a lot of other species as well.
Yes.
So they have a symbiotic relationship with quite a few insects. The most famous being the blue butterflies. So what they do is they'll take the larvae of the blue butterflies and they'll take them down into the anthills, into chambers, and they'll actually protect them. So they'll keep them away from predators above the ground. And what they get in return is they'll milk them for a sweet substance, which then feeds the ants. So it's kind of symbiosis. And when they get big enough, they're turfed out. And then the kind of larvae can then move on to the next stage and eventually become caterpillars.
That's incredible.
So they're basically they're below ground farmers, if you like.
Yeah.
And you can see on each hill, it's full of different types of wildflowers. So this plant here is a yarrow,
yes.
Which is a really nice wildflower. It's got a long history of sort of medicine values. It was used a lot as an antiseptic. I think it was used as an antiseptic quite a lot during World War II to clean wounds and heal wounds. And it's a lovely little wildflower. Each anthill, because the soil is a little bit thinner and warmer, because they pushed it to the surface and they created these kind of microclimates almost, you get a lot more wildflowers on them.
A little mound there, I don't know if that's another one.
Yeah, that'll be another.
And of course the grass on here looks so much more consistent and the growth, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It's not...
It's likely that as well, because the soil is much thinner.
So they've worked the soil.
So they're basically miniaturised. This seems quite like a plant, actually. So this plant is very common in Farthing Downs. It's called salad burnet. And you often get this little tiny red flower, but the leaves are reportedly really quite tasty.
Okay.
And they can taste of sort of cucumber, apparently. So some people put them in salads, but really good for invertebrates. So there's a particular type of moth, called a salad burnet moth, that utilises it, and others will as well. We put up temporary electric fencing around this patch of grassland here, and this is, I mean, they use the whole of Farthing Downs to breed pretty much, but we have the challenge of selecting an area where we think that the skylarks are going to do well, and also we are trying to avoid disrupting and damaging any of the kind of the monuments, heritage monuments. So we've selected probably the best area where we're sort of getting the best of both worlds almost.
So I see things and they probably... I'll ask you if there's anything that piques my interest. Okay, so trialling a new project to protect threatened skylarks. This is what Tom was talking about earlier. I see electric fence. And the hope is, in this fairly long period, that we'll see some activity here. And you'll monitor this daily or pretty much?
We pretty much,
every few days.
There's volunteers in the ranges that sort of monitor it as we go along almost. And the idea is kind of part to kind of provide somewhere safe for the skylarks to come and breed without the risk of disturbance, so that at least we get some security that there's been, you know, breeding taking place this year. But also it's quite a noticeable feature that people can then start to kind of take home that message about not disturbing the skylarks and keeping their dogs under control and appreciating what we have almost. And definitely since the time that's been up, it's been a local talking point. A lot of people have, you know, said they've seen skylarks in the past and told us nice stories about them, and it's been really useful to kind of get that public message out, which often gets overlooked and missed if you just put a poster up. So it's quite like visually, yeah, it's a good visual reference for people. I think what's good about Farthing Downs is the fact there's so much sky. So if you come up here for sunset, we get these amazing sunsets.
Yeah.
And if there's a storm over London, you get to see the whole thing.
Yeah.
So you can see all the different cloud formations, and it's really, really visually impressive. But again, it's amazing as well, talking about that being on the urban fringe of London. It's really dark up here. So if you come up at night time, it's pitch black. And the kind of...
So you don't really get a light spill from all of that light activity, because the light pollution is a bit of a problem, isn't it? When you see some of these aerial shots, you know, even just they might depict something, you know, you see France with Paris, and then, you know, you got your London. But so that's interesting, Tom. So just from, if you're standing here, then at night, you know, you don't really
it gets really dark. I mean, you can still see the glow over the distance.
Yes.
But when you go sort of away from that, it does get really dark. And what we get up here that loves the dark is glowworms.
Oh,
so
nice.
Another short grassland species that people often remember from their childhood. They saw a lot of them when they were growing up.
Yeah.
Yeah, the glowworms, they thrive on having, you know, a lack of light, because the light is the main thing that they use to attract males. So the female glowworm has the light, you know, shining out of her lower body, which attracts the males to signify, you know, I'm here.
They are fascinating, aren't they? I've not seen one for a few years now, but
if you come up here on a summer's night, sort of from July, you might see quite a few. Yeah,
right.
And we often see sort of around sort of 10, maybe up to 20. The ones that we see anyway, but they're quite bright.
So the opening hours of the car park and the park, so is that seasonal, or?
It is, yeah. So the actual Farthing Downs is open sort of 24 hours a day. So there are no gates, you know, for people to walk onto the site.
Land.
It's essentially, it's open for people to come and enjoy. However, the car park, we sort of do open seasonally. So at the moment we're in our summer months, so it's open from 6 a.m. right until 9 o'clock at night, for people to come and enjoy. But obviously if you come and, you know, want to walk and see the stars or see the glowworms, you can just come and it's open for people to explore.
That's good to know.
We're quite fortunate that we have a sort of really good local group of volunteers on each of the sites. So a lot of the work that we do is done on these sort of volunteer task days,
right?
Which helps support the ranger team. So we have groups that come out during the winter and help us with coppicing. They can help us with cutting back scrub, and in the summer months they can help with a variety of tasks like events, and also helping us put new fences and benches in, and replace and update all the endless infrastructure that we need to fix sort of after the winter months. But the reality is, a lot of the work that we do, we just couldn't do without the help of our volunteers, who are a fantastic bunch and do a lot of work for us, which is really great.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I can see there's a sign that says bridleway less steep, and then that looks quite interesting down there. And I bet the old rain trundles down here when it comes down. Where are we headed to now?
So we're just about to pop into a field named 8 Acre.
8 Acre.
8 Acre. It's actually 10 acres, so slightly misleading. But this field is one of our best examples of chalk grassland. So you find a lot of different wildflowers in here, and it's a really unique habitat. So it's a good place to come and spot potential orchids as they start to emerge in the season.
Brilliant.
And we're just looking down here. Yeah, like you said, it's quite steep. This is actually called Drive Road. And it's actually an old drover's road. So it runs on both sides of Farthing Downs. And in past times, this would have been used to take cattle to the various markets and the market towns.
Hence the
Locally.
name.
Hence the name Drove Road.
Yeah.
Or now Drive Road.
Yes.
Yeah, again, this is normally grazed by our sort of herd of Sussex cattle, and also our Jacob sheep as well.
Okay.
So they're a really old breed of sheep, and they almost look like goats, and often they get mistaken for goats. But they're one of the oldest breeds of sheep, sort of.
We're going up here.
Yeah, we'll go through this upper path. So you can see how chalky it is because it's all
Yeah.
grey.
Coming through here, isn't it? Yeah.
And that's a good indicator. That's exactly what we want, because that sort of bare, sort of shallow soils gets really warm in the summer months and the spring, and that allows a lot of wildflowers to thrive rather than the grasses. You can see a few coming up, so there's a lot of small sort of nondescript plants coming through, but this one here is a really famous one, for which actually has given Farthing Downs and Happy Valley unique protected status as what is known as a triple SI. So a site of special scientific interest. I always get that one wrong. And this is the greater yellow rattle. Doesn't look like much at the moment, but it grows a fair bit taller, and you get these kind of yellow, and it's almost described as parrot beak flowers, because they look like a bird's beak. And it covers absolutely everything. So you get a sea of yellow in the summer months.
We've got here.
That's a type, I think it's a type of wood or fields. It'll be field sedge most likely. So it's a type of flowering sedge, and you get these lovely little fronds on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah. The yellow rattle is an amazing plant because it is what's known as a hemiparasitic plant, and it parasitizes on grasses, takes the nutrients from them, and then prevents them from growing. So it's a really, really good way of encouraging other wildflowers. So it almost transforms grasslands away from being sort of monocultures of grasses into a really diverse habitat. And the name Yellow Rattle, can't see it until it's completely gone to seed. But you get these kind of dry seed pods, and if you shake them, they sound like a little rattle.
Wow.
And apparently that's when you used to know that the grass was ready for, or the hay was ready for cutting, was when you could shake it and you could hear that rattling sound. The rosette of an orchid coming up, most likely common spotted orchid. So yeah, that's one of the UK's native orchids. And people are always surprised when you tell them you get orchids in the UK, because what most people know as an orchid is what you get in sort of Sainsbury's.
Yes. So they're quite dense on the borders of these fields. The tree growth is quite dense, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
You've got some evergreens in there that I can see.
We do. So that's actually that's a yew tree.
Yeah. In fact, there's a whole line of them there, isn't there?
Yeah.
Is that the whole boundary there? Or?
The whole boundary of this side of Farthing Downs and Happy Valley is full of mainly yew trees. So it's known locally as Yew Tree Walk. Right. And if you go in there, it's really dark. And quite shady, and it's a really nice respite from summer's heat. Yes. If you come in you know, in a heat wave.
Bit of nature to provide.
Yeah.
Because you do need it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It seems like we saw that view, that sort of dry road there, and again you get an appreciation of it here, don't you? It's quite a steep valley down.
It is.
Try and pan around a bit here.
And so we're looking on this direction. To the left is New Hill, which is that's part of Farthing Downs now. And that was purchased, I think, around about the early 2000s, around 2005.
Okay, recent times.
And it's got a fantastic story in that, actually. There was a lot planned for New Hill, and it had maps drawn up and ready to go for it to become a housing estate. So names of the roads were put in place, an electricity substation, I think, was built. And all that stopped it was the outbreak of the war, or the Second World War. And shortly after the sort of start, it was turned into ploughed up, and things were planted.
By the Agricultural Committee?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yes, yeah. I think there's
so much was turned over to
exactly
agricultural use.
And after that time, when they realised that it was actually really infertile and the ground was pretty poor because of the chalk and they couldn't actually grow that much, it scrubbed over and it became a very sort of woody, scrubby sort of site, and left that way for a long time until eventually the City of London were able to purchase it and add it to their collection of the 4 Coulsdon Commons. And what it brings, after a lot of hard work to restore the chalk grassland and to clear all that scrub, is an amazing meadow in the summer, and it's actually one of our best sites for different wildflowers. You can see the little bits of yellow picked up of the cowslips, but we normally graze and hay cut it.
And actually, aside from the very distant hum of an aeroplane that I just heard going over, you know, the only real punctuation of the piece is from those beautiful bird song.
That's it. It's very quiet, very calm down here. And then to the right, that way is Happy Valley. Yeah,
there's a joined up team overall.
Yes. Yeah.
Who work together and common aims and
even though we're separate organisations. That kind of umbrella of the South London Downs as a national nature reserve, it's quite a new thing. It was only done in 2019, but the idea of sort of bringing those sites together and preserving them, protecting them for development, you know, is essential, you know, in managing what is one of the biggest sites for people to come and enjoy as an open space in London.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And Tom, you were saying, so there's some serious age to these.
Yeah. It's hard to tell how old they are by sight, but the Happy Valley Ranger has previously done some studies on their age, and through tree ring analysis has actually found them to be hundreds of years old. And they have this amazing berry that you see sort of a bit later in the year, this sort of red fleshy berry. And that is used by a lot of different types of birds and by a really fantastic little mammal, which is the dormouse.
Right.
Which is really rare nowadays, but actually has been known to do well in Happy Valley and on the edge of Farthing Downs. And you can sometimes see evidence that they've been here, because you'll often find them where you've both got yew tree because of the berries, because that's their favourite snack, and then hazel trees, which we've got all around this woodland because they like eating the nuts, and they use the leaves as well to make their sort of cosy nests. And also they will sometimes be found bedded down in coppice stalls, so you've got like a tight network of all these stalls. They'll be hidden amongst the stumps. Wow. So they kind of like to have all these combinations, so the elements here are just right
for the dormouse.
But obviously we live on the edge of sort of a busy site, so
they
might not be here in so many numbers, but there's definitely been evidence of them in the past. And if you see a chewed hazelnut, there's some good ways of finding out if it's been nibbled by a squirrel or a rodent or even a dormouse. So
you're well trained to look for these things.
Yeah, when you start noticing them, they're quite fun to sort of, you know, find out.
But so as Tom was saying, in hot weather, you come under here and you can sort of tell. I mean, it's a cloudy day today, but and the leaves are just coming through now this time of year. But you would get some very pleasant shelter and shade from a bright sun, and still enjoy the nature.
Yeah,
it'd be wonderful.
One thing that's not sort of well known is that the entirety pretty much of the Downs itself is actually a scheduled monument, and it's London's biggest scheduled monument. So you think of all the monuments you have in London, sort of, you know, maybe Tower, what's called the Tower Bridge, and other sites, you know, the whole area, because there's so much history, means that it's given that extra level of protection to prevent all that heritage being lost, as well as sort of our natural history as well through through the other designations.
Well, thank you very much, Tom.
You're welcome.
That's been great. It's a collection of stories, really. It's got this massive history, but then, you know, we've seen the broader views. We've seen the connection with, you know, London and some of the architecture, but we've also seen these delicate little, you know, wildflowers and orchids and various things emerging at this time of year. So what a rich place to visit. Fascinating. So if you can come along, please do. And all the details will be in the description below. And if you're miles away and you can't actually get here, then I hope this video has enabled you to get a real flavour of Farthing Downs, and also some of the great work that these guys do to keep it so pleasant and a rich place to visit. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.